Hello and welcome to this episode of Video Shamanism. I am Alex Lipton, and this is going to be my first podcast done with a better camera setup than before. Last time we were doing it on a Zoom webinar, and you can check all those out on our YouTube channel down here. But for this episode, I thought I should ramp up the production value because this is something I've wanted to talk about for quite some time. And there have been things going on in life, so been putting it off, procrastinating a lot, but the subject matter of today that I've been wanting to talk about for a while is on the subject of the Sumerian deities known as Enki and Enlil. Now, these are two of the most important, well-recognized deities. Most people that look into the Sumerian creation story, they're going to come across Enki and Enlil in one way or another. So this is the original discussion I wanted to get into, was Enki and Enlil. Now, the reason why I had to do it today is because when I woke up this morning, went onto my YouTube feed and looked at just my recommended videos, and there was a video that came up about David Wilcock, saying that David Wilcock has resigned from Gaia TV. Now, if you're not aware of David Wilcock, I highly recommend you check him out. This is somebody that I've been following for about 10 years now, actually. And he's an interesting character in the sense that he has a way of stringing together a narrative with all of the conspiracy stuff that you could possibly imagine. And the conspiracy stuff is a lot like a rabbit hole. You're going to go down this thing, and your whole world, if you're really willing to go down the rabbit hole, your mind is going to be blown, especially if you're coming from a place where you have a preconceived notion about the reality, where we are in history, how we got here, the scientific understandings, and why we see the world the way we are. So the conspiracy theory world is really well put together by David Wilcock, or at least that's how I've always seen it. But the thing is, over the years, it's been a very touch and go thing with David Wilcock. For the first couple years watching him in 2008, it was like music to my ears because it was like going down the rabbit hole. There's so much information. It's very complex and dense, and there's so much to take in. With extraterrestrial involvement on Earth, to government cover-ups, to you name it, everything. And I remember when I first found David Wilcock back in college, it was he was able to put the whole story together and actually tell the story so it made sense. And he had a really good theme, in my opinion, which was synchronicity. It always felt like, after watching him at least, it always felt like an older brother in a way. And I really looked up to him and admired him. And I still do. I still respect David Wilcock to a certain extent. And I'll get back to the Enki and Enlil stuff in a minute. I just want to get forward about David Wilcock and the way I see them. And I actually have a podcast with John Allen where we talk about David Wilcock at some length, so I won't get too much into it. But David Wilcock had a stop point for me when I was listening to George Norrie's podcast, or radio show, Coast to Coast, one night. He was on the show with some person, I forgot who it was, but then George Norrie said, "Hold on, we have to go to a call with David Wilcock's live on the air, and it sounds like he's in distress." So they stopped the interview that they were doing, and David Wilcock gets on the air, and he is crying. He's sobbing hysterically. He's freaking out, going on about how the government's trying to kill him and how he can't take it anymore and how he's trying to do the right thing. And it was honestly, the vibe that I got from that was just like, whoa, what the hell, dude? It's like, I mean, he was, to give him the benefit of the doubt, he was afraid, and you don't want to make fun of somebody who's afraid. But at the same time, it's like, this guy he's got an ego, let's just say. This guy is certainly full of himself, and I think that's been fostered by this whole thing about David Wilcock believing that he's the reincarnation, or a reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, the famed prophet, the sleeping prophet as he's known. So if you don't know who Edgar Cayce is, definitely go check him out. But when he called in crying hysterically, freaking out that they were trying to kill him, it was like this whole thing, like he's a crusader in the truth movement trying to disclose all sorts of information that he shouldn't be disclosing, and he's trying to fight the good fight, and apparently something happened to him where it was like, oh my God, they're trying to kill me. And my initial feeling from that was like, no, like, dude, like, no one's gonna try to kill you. It was also a turning point for him around that time. I'm not sure exactly what year it was. It was well after 2008, though. he started shifting from talking about metaphysical stuff and extraterrestrials and consciousness and synchronicity over more into what is known now as the deep state or the cabal or the Illuminati and all of this intelligence war that, in my opinion, isn't a real. It is a real thing and it is going on, but he almost started to go down. He did start to go down the Alex Jones path of things. Alex Jones being they're putting fluoride in the water to make frogs gay. Well, you know what? There's an interesting parallel with Alex Jones and David Wilcock, as we're starting to find out. I was talking with John Allen about how David Wilcock is basically becoming the spiritual version of Alex Jones. And what do I mean by that? Alex Jones started off in a very interesting place. He was, in my opinion, a really good journalist, and he has a lot of really great information on what is now known as the deep state. He's this guy who supposedly snuck into Bohemian Grove, the hidden camp out in the woods where all of the elites get together and discuss their secret plans on how to control the world. And that it's this whole dark religion that these guys are in, and this is a part of the rabbit hole that I mean, at first was really interesting when you get into false flag operations and how the government has there's a shadow government that's secretly controlling things, Illuminati and whatnot. But Alex Jones, who has brought a lot of that to light over the course of time, becoming more and more famous, just like anybody, starts to get a little inflated. Their ego starts to get a little inflated. And Alex Jones literally gets inflated to the point where he starts to turn red and gets really angry. And, oh, they're coming to kill us. Hillary Clinton eats babies for breakfast. Oh, my God. It's like, you know what? Sometimes some of the things he says are just a lot nowadays. A lot of the things he's saying are just so out there, so crazy. And even over the years, the way I always saw Alex Jones, after looking into him in the first place, discovering who he was, Alex Jones to me has always been somebody who just adds fuel onto a fire. Like in a conspiracy-minded sense, put your tinfoil hats on for a second. The Illuminati, he's not fighting the Illuminati. If he was really a threat to the Illuminati or the deep state, he would have been killed. And so the thing is, I would imagine nowadays the best method for the deep state or the cabal or any of these people to discredit somebody is to just inflate their ego and just kind of they'll sound crazy on their own. Like they'll kind of shoot themselves in the foot. If they're a true enemy of the cabal, they'll get inflated and start making missteps also to the point where they discredit themselves. So for a perfect example on Alex Jones with that, and again, I'll get into the Enki and Enlil thing in a minute, but I just need to preface this because this is important. This is why I'm even talking about this in the first place, and there is a good wraparound story to it. So stick with me if you have the patience. This might be a long video, but thank you for being here and subscribe. Okay, Alex Jones was sort of underground for a long time in the sense that he wasn't famous. He wasn't mainstream. He was sort of a YouTube celebrity, if anything. But then when the whole Donald Trump campaign started to take place and he got really famous because Donald Trump and Alex Jones have been together he's interviewed him a few times and he bolsters Donald Trump up to being this great savior of taking us away from the deep state. Which, in my opinion, is total nonsense. I think there's an element to like Donald Trump being like a monkey wrench into the system, but not necessarily like he's actively a superhero trying to take down the cabal. I have a hard time believing that. So, Alex Jones, when he's featured in the mainstream, when they talk about him on Last Week Tonight, or they talk about it on Bill Maher, or even on CNN or MSNBC, they show Alex Jones's clips of him just beat red, frantically talking about how Hillary Clinton eats babies for breakfast, or that they're putting fluoride in the water to make frogs gay. That's a common point you hear from Alex Jones now. And so they show that snippet, they cherry pick that and be like, well, see, look, clearly Alex Jones is out of his fucking mind. And yeah, if you look at it that way, I mean, he is out of his fucking mind. But again, to the credit of how do we discredit somebody without actually getting rid of them? We just inflate their ego, and then they get so famous that they kind of discredit themselves. So in a huge way, Alex Jones discredited his own self. He shot himself in the foot, metaphorically speaking, by going on these crazy emotional rants that distract from the actual good research that he's done. So it's like he's adding fuel to a fire. Okay, so that's just Alex Jones context for David Wilcock. Now, David Wilcock, when he called in that night on Coast to Coast, freaking out that he was going to be killed or that they were trying to kill him and that I'm just trying to do the right thing, George. Oh, please help me. David Wilcock has a lot of really great information, but it's getting overshadowed, in my opinion, by this growing sort of inflated ego that he has. When he does lectures, he's not a great comedian, but you can tell that he's got a big ego. I've seen him live a few times, and I love him like a brother in a sense, like a distant brother. David Wilcock has veered off from talking about all the things that I found important or interesting in the first place, and he's really gotten into this whole deep state cabal thing. And so David Wilcock, fast forwarding to the present moment, why I'm even doing this is that when I woke up this morning, I saw on YouTube that David Wilcock is resigning from Gaia TV, which is where he has most of his television shows, or his programming is on there. And the statement was that David Wilcock believes that Gaia TV, Gaia.com, is being run in a Luciferian cabal-run system. So it's basically, Gaia is a front for the cabal, and that they're spreading disinformation to discredit all of the wonderful things on there. And so I was just like, wow, this is interesting. I guess I saw this coming. David Wilcock writes articles, and he has a website, divinecosmos.com. And he has these blogs, and every now and then he writes these really long, interesting stories about the cabal, or like the state of the dark union, let's just say. And a lot of it's really interesting. But recently, the last one that he wrote was so long, so ridiculous, and a lot of red flags started going up for me when I was reading this. One of them was that, according to him, according through these insiders that he has, and David Wilcock says, I have the best bullshit detector. I know when people are lying to me. So David Wilcock has the best bullshit detector of all time. I find that a little hard to believe, and maybe he's a little full of himself there. But in this article, he talks about how Jeff Sessions and Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump and all these people are actually crusaders for the alliance to fight the cabal, and that they're going to be the heroes of this big disclosure that's going to be happening. And I have a real hard time believing that. And if it's true, you know, I'll stand corrected. But at the same time, I'm very skeptical about this, because if the alliance that's fighting the cabal is full of people like Jeff Sessions and Rudy Giuliani, then we're fucked, really. That's not a good situation. So why does all of this have to do with Enki and Enlil, the Sumerian gods of creation and all that? Now, I think it has a lot to do with it, because part of the reason that David Wilcock is resigning in this long letter, which I didn't have a chance to read, but I watched a few videos on it. You can check it out, look into this. It's no secret that David Wilcock is resigning from Gaia. But he said that it was the first episode of season 1 of the show Ancient Civilizations, which is on Gaia. And honestly, this is one of my favorite shows on TV. Oh my God, am I a Luciferian? Oh my God, do I worship Satan? Do I hate God? Is it all part of a conspiracy? No, absolutely not. The reason why Ancient Civilizations is one of my favorite shows is because it tells the story. It's like Ancient Aliens from the History Channel, but without the alien thing as much. There is mention of it, but it focuses much more on the fact that there is a lost chapter in our civilization as being humans on this planet, which is very much influencing what is going on the planet right now. And that this Illuminati or this deep state, or how, I don't even like calling it the deep state, because that's a very right-wing kind of way of looking at it. I don't want to even use that word. So let's just say the cabal. So the cabal supposedly has this knowledge of Enki and Enlil and the true history, this lost chapter of human history, and they've been using that against us in a lot of ways. Let's just tell the story about Enki and Enlil to keep things simple. This is a very fascinating story that was made clear to me when I read the book Gods of Eden by the author William Bramley. And the book goes into an explanation of human history from the point of view of who the Anunnaki were. The reason why I like the book Gods of Eden compared to something let's just say written by Zachariah Sitchin, the Earth Chronicles, and the story of the other place that you mostly hear the household name about the Anunnaki in the first place, Zachariah Sitchin. The reason why I like William Bramley's take on this whole thing more is because he comes at it from a point of view where he had no belief in aliens whatsoever or extraterrestrials. His intention was not to write a book about this. He wanted to write a book on the origin of war. Where did war come from? This is something that when he started to do the research over the course of many, many years, every paper trail that he went through started to lead him to this ancient time where there were these beings that created a race of humans to be slaves, and that wars were fought over these humans. So he went down these paper trails not believing in aliens, and he would arrive at aliens and be like, well, I must have took a wrong turn somewhere, so let me get rid of all that. I'll go back, start again from a different point of view, again to find the origin of war. But he did this a number of times over many years. Every time it brought him back to this period in antiquity where extraterrestrials, for lack of a better word, came down and manipulated human events, and this is what is the origin of war. So he decided to write a book about that because it was like a point, at that point, all right, well, I would be doing a disservice to my original intention. If my intention is to find the origin of war and I leave this out, that's going to be really, that's wrong. That's wrong. So the book Gods of Eden really goes into this whole story about the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki story goes a lot like this. Roughly speaking, here's my take on the Anunnaki. The word Anunnaki it somehow translates to those who from the heavens came. So from the heavens to earth. Even the word Anunnaki, the word Anu is the name of the patriarch of the Anunnaki. Okay, so the group of extraterrestrials. Let's just use the word extraterrestrials. Anu was like the grandfather. He was the one that was in the patriarch of the family. So what happens is their planet is dying, and they come to Earth in order to get resources to help their planet, or to come here almost as like refugees from this dying planet. Think of like Planet Krypton in the Superman comic book series. These guys came to Earth to escape some sort of problems, or they had to fix something, and they had their own politics and their own thing going on. So the Anunnaki show up. Anu, the head Papa Anu, okay, he tells his son Enki, this is the first character I'll tell you about in this story. He tells him that you need to go down there and you need to create a race of beings in order to mine the gold. Okay, so what do I mean by all this? Let's start back with Enki. Enki is a genetic engineer, according to these Sumerian stories. He's somebody that is going to create and manifest life. And what he is tasked to do is to create a race of beings that can actually live on this earth. Because according to this story and the mythology of all this, the Anunnaki were from somewhere else. They literally could not inhabit the earth because of their biology for a number of reasons. They didn't want to do the work. Maybe they were lazy. I'm not sure of that. So Enki is tasked with the objective to create a race of people that could be their servants to actually do all the physical labor on Earth while they were here. So Enki comes down to Earth, and he is making these people, and he creates a hybrid race of beings from the DNA of the Anunnaki and the DNA of the indigenous hominid life on Earth. So imagine you got these advanced humanoid type beings coming to Earth, mixing their DNA with the ape-like people on planet Earth, creating this new race of beings, which, according to Enki, was a beautiful experiment that had all sorts of unforeseen consequences. These beings were very intelligent, they were beautiful, and Enki, as a scientist, looked at this as an experiment and just got so caught up with the experiment and just basically fell in love with his creation. He was like, oh my God, these things are amazing. They're teaching me all sorts of things that I totally was not aware of, or I'm not even thinking about. And remember that Enki was tasked with a single objective: to create a race to mine the gold, to do the work. So ultimately, he was charged with creating slaves, but in the process, as a scientific engineer type person, created these slaves and just got so caught up with the beauty of it that he forgot to make them do all the work. So it was just, he was kind of having a great time on this planet with all of these new beings that were really smart. So Anu, his father, shows back up to Earth and says, hey, Where's all the gold? Let me see the worksheets. What have you got done here all this time? And we're talking maybe hundreds, thousands of years. The scope of time it's hard to actually perceive that. So Enki is just like, oh, lost track of time. I didn't get anything done while you were gone. And so Anu is struggling with the fact that their race is dying or their planet's dying. They had a mission. You're not filling the mission. All right, so I'm taking you out of control. You are no longer in command of this operation. I'm going to send in your half-brother, Enlil. Now, this is where Enlil comes in. He's going to take control of this operation, and then you just have to follow his orders. So now Enlil is the leader of the Anunnaki at this point on Earth. Enlil shows up, sees the situation, assesses it, and says to his brother Enki and says, look, all right, well, this race of beings you created, they're too smart. They're not following orders at all. They have too much free will, too much knowledge of who we really are. I want you to murder all of them, get rid of them. We'll start fresh, and you can create a new race of beings with the same concept, except one little thing. Take out their consciousness. Take out the part of them that has free will and make them very obedient to us. Just make them like we can train them, and they'll do exactly what we say and not ask any questions. So Enki looks over and says, all right, well, yes, sir, because he's the leader. He has to, it's a chain of command. But then when Enki is going to his first generation, his first creation, these beings, it's like this is asking a father to kill his children. He's not going to kill them. He's not interested in doing that whatsoever. But he will do something to appease Enlil. So he takes this group and hides them. He takes them away, tells Enlil, yeah, I got rid of them. They're gone now. But really, they're just living somewhere else. So then what Enki does, since he has no choice in the matter, is to create another race, a second generation of human alien hybrid beings that are going to follow orders, not ask any questions, and just do what they say. So this is where the story of Genesis kind of picks up in the Old Testament, where God comes in and creates Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to follow orders. Now, only difference is a huge difference, is that Enki is actually the creator of the human race. Enlil is the administrator of the Anunnaki, and there's a whole bunch of these Anunnaki guys. It's a whole council of beings. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, it's just one God who is doing all of these things. It seems kind of schizophrenic at times, a lot of times when you read the Bible. My sister read the Bible and tells me stories about how God would come in and just be like, all right, well, if you love me, you'll kill your son. To Abraham, I believe it was. So Abraham goes, he's like, but I love my son. He's like, nope, but if you love me, you'll prove it and you'll kill him. So Abraham's like, oh, he's God, I got to do something. So he goes to kill his son, but then God shows back up. He's like, that was a test. I didn't really want you to kill him. It was just a test. See, look how fucked up you are. You were going to kill your own son. This type of shit seems to happen a lot in the Old Testament, with God being this kind of schizophrenic character. But that's only if you look at it as if this is just one God. A lot of these Old Testament stories were taken from the original Sumerian stories or the Babylonian stories from a previous thousands of years before that. And instead of just one God, there was a whole council of these beings. Let's not even use the word God. These are beings. These are deified humans, let's just say. These are just normal people that have advanced technology that are creating a situation where people have to look up to them as if they are in charge. And the people looking up at them are like, oh my God, I'll follow whatever you say. They look so much more advanced. So Enki creates this race, the second race of beings that are living like slaves, compared to the first race especially. Enlil is running a really tight ship. We need to mine the resources, and they're working their asses off. The humans are pretty much disposable animals. Imagine like cows in our modern day world when you're going up the 5 and you're seeing Harris Ranch, all of these cows all over the place. What are they doing there? What's their purpose? Their purpose is our food. So we keep them there. They're animals and they're just products. They're not even, it's almost like they don't have a soul. They don't have a consciousness. Who gives a fuck? This is exactly how Enlil looked at this second generation of humans, is that they're just a product. They do what we say. You know, if they're not doing what we say, we'll just kill them. No big deal. Enki, however, looks at this as these are his children. And he's looking at the first generation of his children, which are still alive. and seeing how free they are, and then looking over and seeing this slave race that he created, and then they're also his children, and he's like, oh man, this is not sitting well with me. I don't like the fact that my children are being abused so horribly. That's to put it very lightly, okay? This is like the origin of genocide we're talking about here. Enki has a whole faction of Anunnaki that side with him. Enlil has a whole faction of Anunnaki that side with him. And since Enlil is in charge of all the Anunnaki, most of them are with Enlil just by default. It's like a military chain of command. You have to stay with him. Enki secretly begins to infiltrate the, let's just say, Garden of Eden, or some might say Atlantis, or this primal place where the concentration camp of slave humans was living, or living in a terrible condition. Enki starts to sneak in there. Enki begins to coerce these people. Hey, look, you're living in the Matrix. You're living in you're a slave. Everything you do is not even for you. Wouldn't you rather be free? Wouldn't you rather have a knowledge of who you are? The men wouldn't listen to this because the men are very obedient to Enlil, and they're like, nope, we're not even paying attention to that. The plain and simple, the women are more receptive. So this is where the story of the serpent entering the garden and tempting Eve to eat the apple from the tree of good and evil. This is the tree of knowledge. And big difference is that Enki is a good guy, okay? Enki's a good guy who is in a terrible situation. Enki wants to help people not live in shit. So Enki starts to teach these people about who they really are, where they come from, what they're capable of, that they don't have to do whatever the Anunnaki wants them to do. They can do what they want to do. They can be free. This is what freedom's all about. So this is where the birth of freedom and the whole fight for freedom comes into play. So Enki starts taking all of these people and they start leaving on their own accord. And when Enlil shows back up to Earth and he looks at his concentration camp and he's like, where are all my fucking slaves? And he's like, Enki. He knew it was his brother. He knew that this was his brother's work, and this is the beginning of the feud that is still going on to this day, which is the seed for all wars. This is the beginning of the real duality, or the, let's just say, the very classic image of the angel and the devil on your shoulder. Now, one person's angel may be another person's devil. What's right for you may not be right for me, and vice versa. So it's not about which one is right or which one is wrong necessarily. It's just the fact that there are these two sides, positive and negative, and that they're relative. This all really began back then. This was a division in our consciousness. So this war broke out between Enki and Enlil. So this war is raging on for quite some time, and it's not going well. And again, like how I said, the angel and the devil, and how it's not necessarily like one is the right one and one is the wrong one. Like the way I'm building this up as if is like Enki is the good guy and Enlil is the bad guy. Trying to be objective and look at this from a historical point of view, Enlil was a slave master and Enki was the person who was trying to stop slavery. But the thing is, this is a war that could not be won. It's like a yin yang. There's positive and negative. It's just going to keep going around and around in circles. So Enki, by doing this rebellion against his brother, knowingly started a war that could not be won, although he was trying his best given the circumstances. Over time, these names, Enki and Enlil, get changed and adapted depending on the civilization or the geography in which they're located. Now, remind you, these Anunnaki people from the heavens who came, they were not located, isolated to one area. We've been describing mostly what's going on in Mesopotamia, but these two beings have their presence all around the world, especially places like Egypt, in India. They have a total stamp on that civilization and their influence on it. And also, it's like a little bit different each time. This war accumulated in what became known as the Great Flood. The flood story comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they talk about the Anunnaki, Enki, and Enlil. All these guys are mentioned in there, and a whole pantheon of these Sumerian deities are mentioned. So Enlil decides that the human race and what's going on with this planet and all of the people and this whole thing is completely out of control, and that we need to stop it. We need to allow it to end. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, this is when Enlil decides that we're going to make a flood. This is mythologized, but there's a lot of reasons and speculation about what actually caused the flood. But the point in this story is that this flood was allowed to happen. Enlil and the Anunnaki command, the administration of the Anunnaki, made a vote that we're going to allow that. We're going to wipe out this whole experiment. We're going to start fresh after that. Enki, again, being undercut by his older brother, is like, I don't like the fact that we're just killing off all of my children. I came down here with a mission to be a slave, and I'm seeing that these slaves are not really slaves, that these are really good people. We should be taking care of them. They don't agree with him. So Enlil decides we're going to have this flood, and Enki goes and finds Noah, or a character in the Sumerian story, I'm not sure who his name was, but became known as Noah. Goes to Noah and is like, look, there's a flood coming, and I'm going to help you get out of it. And it wasn't just Noah. There was like an effort on Enki and his whole pantheon of faction of Anunnaki to help humankind survive this big catastrophe. So again, another example about how in the Bible and the way it's interpreted nowadays is that there's one God who's doing all these things. But especially when you go back into the Old Testament and you go into the earlier translations of this, we're not talking about just one God. We're talking about a whole variety of different beings that would account for why it seems so schizophrenic now when you're interpreting it. Like, oh, what does it mean? Well, no, but let's take it a little bit more literally. These are two different beings, or at least two different agendas competing for the fate of what's going on with humanity. So, end of the story here is what's going on today. This conflict has not ended. It's been going on ever since the time it started. There's so much more to this Anunnaki story that I really don't think I have time to get into, or really, I think you should do the research yourself. But the fact is that there's been this conflict between Enki and Enlil going on forever. And our perception of what's really going on with Enki and Enlil has been distorted over many, 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 many years. Thousands of years. Here's a very simple fact, that history is a series of wars, and that history is written by the victors of those wars. Let's think about that. By definition, there's an entire side of history that we're just not even hearing. Or we're hearing, but we're hearing from the other side. And like the game of telephone, as time has gone on, the story is modified and changed over time. And then people want to be in charge, so they'll change the story to suit their own needs. But then that'll get changed and get thrown away. Some knowledge will get burned altogether. And what we do know is that it's completely up for debate. And one of the things that really made me so fascinated with this Enki and Enlil subject is that when you look at it from the terms of Enki, it's like the ultimate twist to human history. Oh my God, the good guy was the bad guy, and the bad guy was the good guy. Whoop, pole reversal. So it's like we've been living in this world where we're worshiping a certain deity who is not really the deity that we think it is. And again, this is it goes again and fractally compounds upon itself, where the good guy and the bad guy are constantly interchanged, and the story changes depending on who's actually telling it. So I'm not saying go out there and worship Enki, because that's not what Enki would have wanted in the first place. Enki was trying to help people become self-empowered and liberated from all sorts of worshiping of higher deities, because we're all one in this universe. They were victims of that same scenario as much as we are now. Okay, so something else that's important to bring up here in terms of Enki is that Enki is worshipped or looked at as Lucifer in the story of the Bible, because again, like I was telling you, that story of the serpent entering the garden, according to the Sumerian story, was actually Enki trying to help free the humans from this slavery that they were living in. So that story got distorted because that war between Enki and Enlil did not work out so well for Enki. They had to go into hiding. Enlil became the Lord of the Air, or the Lord. He's the great administrator. He's the one that's like, Enki's out of the picture, fuck him, let's worship Enlil. So in the Bible, who is the opposition to God? Lucifer, or the devil. So in that story, in that context, Enki is technically the devil, and technically Lucifer. And Lucifer translates roughly to the light bearer, or the bringer of the light. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it in that historical context. But and there was a lot of saltiness and aggression and angst, obviously, between the two factions of this, and there still are today. But just because Enki was trying to do the right thing doesn't mean that he was right. Doesn't mean he was the good guy and the one we should worship. Doesn't mean that he's the God. No, this was a war that totally fucked up our understanding of what God really is, which is this infinite, all-loving and forgiving creative force that exists everywhere. In my opinion, God is more like the Force. And there is no two sides of the Force. You've got the Jedi and the Sith, but they're not the Force. That's the whole thing in the new Last Jedi movie, is that if you think the Jedi are the ones that have the Force and they're the ones that, it's like, without the Jedi there's no Force, then you're fucking wrong. So again, that works on both sides of the story. And unfortunately, the Cabal or the Illuminati, these people, they know about all of this. And there's a whole hierarchy of levels of knowledge, kind of like Scientology. The higher up you go, the more you become aware. And even when you're at the top and you think you know everything, there's still something above you that you had no idea about, probably for a really good reason. So the Cabal totally worships Enki, or they worship Lucifer. And that is a distortion of what, in my opinion, is just a really interesting historical account of what actually happened on Earth, or what is the foundation for things. I think Enki's a really interesting character. I would rather be on Team Enki than on Team Enlil, that's for sure. But here's the reality, is that that war is an ongoing war that will go on forever until we all put our weapons down, until we drop the duality and live in a state of unity rather than a state of separation. And that's something that both Enki and Enlil don't really resonate with. So back to David Wilcock, saying that that first episode of Ancient Civilizations is a Luciferian propaganda piece and that he has to resign. The big thing about that first episode of Ancient Civilizations is that it goes into this whole Enki and Enlil story. And I loved it. I thought it was it was just like, after all these years learning about this and seeing something on TV like that, or on Gaia, I was just like, thank you. Thank you for putting it together in a way that I can agree with and at least like makes sense. David Wilcock sees that as like a big distraction. And I mean, I'm not going to speak for David Wilcock, but in my observation of his resignation, he sees that as a big Luciferian agenda. It's like, oh, we shouldn't even be talking about Enki. It's like David seems, and I haven't heard David really talk about this much, it's like he kind of underplays all of that as just a Luciferian, evil, satanic way of looking at things. And I look at it more as just understanding the history and seeing that we've all been hoodwinked. We've all been lied to about how we got here and why things are going on the way they are. And if we're really going to learn from our mistakes, we need to recognize that we did make mistakes in the past. And this whole Enki and Enlil thing is a great mistake in a big part. But I think that Enki was trying to do the right thing, although don't worship Enki. Enki would not want you to be worshipped. And the same thing goes with, like the angel and the devil switching both sides, same thing goes for Jesus. And Jesus, who was a great teacher in my opinion, and he was teaching people about forgiveness and love and all of these wonderful things, I don't think he really wanted to be worshipped in the first place. I think that there was a whole hidden side to that story as well. And you can look into the Gnostic traditions and the origins of the Essenes and how Christianity was a reformation onto something else that was going on before that. And that was great. But anything that was ever good got exploited. And the best example of that is religion. And science, honestly, is a religion of today. Not to say that science is wrong, but science gets exploited and turned into something that it really shouldn't be. And it's going out of control a lot of times, just like religion is going out of control. So I guess the moral of this story is that a lot of these, the duality is interchangeable, or the polarity is a polarity. Duality is a fight between two polarities. Polarity is just the fact that there are two sides of a division. And Enki and Enlil, in my opinion, is the historical account of that original separation that we had. And when you look at the story, it's like a good reminder that we are living in the Matrix. We have been lied to about our place in the world here. And my message about this whole thing is that we should not be worshiping any of these things. The concept of worshiping, bowing down to somebody that's greater than us, whether it's Enki or Enlil or science or religion, like however you want to look at it, God or Satan, you shouldn't be worshiping any of this shit. The real thing is that it's within you. The creator is within you. I think we can get into this in some following episodes, go more into the creation and the esoteric meaning of nature and all of that stuff. But for this situation, I just want to say, David Wilcock, you're just turning into a spiritual Alex Jones. And you know what? I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, but at the same time, you say your bullshit detector is the best bullshit detector in the world. Well, you sound like Donald Trump. I think that you are more easily manipulated when you think that you have the best of whatever it is. When you're certain about something, that's when you start to fuck up. So don't worry, I'm going to still listen to you, David. And I hope that this video reaches some people and starts to question, well, maybe David Wilcock's like, we shouldn't be worshiping David Wilcock, because a lot of people are doing that. And I'm not saying that everyone thinks that what he's saying is right. I don't think that at all. But I do think he's got a lot of information that's worth looking at. So I just had to say this. Thank you, David Wilcock, for allowing me to be inspired to actually tell this story about Enki and Enlil from my point of view. So we'll get into more of this as we go on, but just as an introduction, Enki and Enlil, this is Video Shamanism. Thank you very much for watching.